PT, short for Playable Teaser, was a 2014 interactive horror experience developed by Kojima Productions under 7780 Studio and published by Konami Digital Entertainment. It was directed by Hideo Kojima and in collaboration with filmmaker Guillermo del Toro and was released free on PlayStation 4. The project was later revealed to be a teaser for Silent Hills and a cancelled installment in the Silent Hill series. Following the cancellation of Silent Hill, Konami removed PT from the PlayStation Store, making it impossible to reinstall once deleted. This decision was widely criticized and led to numerous fan remakes and creations. Despite the short length and the limited availability, PT is frequently cited as one of the most greatest horror games of all time, praised for its atmosphere, direction, and presentation, though opinions on its puzzle design were mixed. Unlike previous Silent Hill games, PT used a first-person perspective and provided the player with no means of combat or defense. The player controls an unnamed protagonist who awakens in a haunted suburban house. The playable area consists of an L-shaped hallway connected to a bathroom and staircase. The environment continuously loops, with subtle or drastic changes appearing after each sudden cycle. The player's only actions are walking and zooming in. Progression requires observing environmental changes and solving cryptic puzzles. Through the game, the protagonist is stalked by a hostile ghost named Lisa. If she catches the player, the loop resets, sometimes accompanied by a sudden jump scare. Her design draws comparison to figures from Japanese folklore, such as Eerie and Unborn. The narrative of PT is delivered indirectly through environmental details, radio broadcasts, and surreal imagery. Early in the game, a radio reports the familicide committed by a father, later suggesting similar cases. As the loop continues, the player encounters disturbing imagery, including a crying fetus-like creature in a sink, a refrigerator hanging from the ceiling leaking blood, and cryptic messages warning about alternate realities. Later sequences grow increasingly unstable, referring red light, distorted movement, infinite hallways, and unsettling audio such as a woman being murdered and a baby crying. A radio broadcast references the War of the Worlds, and a voice repeatedly speaks the number 204863. At one point, the game simulates a system crash before restarting into a final loop. In the final section, the player reassembles torn pieces of a photograph and completes a series of hidden tasks. A ringing telephone delivers a message, "You've been chosen," which after a door unlocks, the protagonist exits the house. A subsequent cutscene reveals the character being portrayed by Norman Reedus, officially identifying PT as a playable teaser of Silent Hill. PT was developed by using Kojima Productions' Fox Energy. Kojima intended the experience to scare players through psychological tension rather than graphic violence. Drawing inspiration from horror films such as surreal media, the puzzles were designed to be deliberately obscure, with the expectations that players would take days or weeks to uncover solutions. After release, modders discovered hidden details within the game, including unused scenes, the constant presence of Lisa behind the player after acquiring the flashlight, and the unfinished exterior environments, resembling Silent Hill. These discoveries further fueled the interest in analysts, solidifying PT's reputation as a landmark in horror and the game design despite being brief. Alright, we're up to the theories part. One of the most unsettling interpretations of PT suggests that the game's horror is not caused by external force, but by the player unknowingly interacting with themselves across fractured timelines or reality. This theory focuses heavily on the bathroom sequence, where each loop suddenly escalates. At first, nothing happens, then crying is heard behind the door. Later, the door moves as if someone is on the other side. Eventually, the player is trapped inside the bathroom, hearing footsteps outside while someone tries to enter. When the door finally opens, it raises the question posed to repeatedly through the game: are you sure the only one is you? The implication is that the presence on the other side of the door may be the player themselves, from a different loop or reality. This interpretation is reinforced by environmental details, such as the hole in the bathroom wall, while inside the bathroom, players can see what appears to be an eye reflecting back through the hole. Later, during the distorted hallway sequence, the player can look through that same hole from the outside. This creates the disturbing possibility that the player was previously observing themselves, further supporting the idea of overlapping timelines or self-haunting. Some theories extend this idea further, proposing that during the red hallway sequence, the players actually experienced the events from Lisa's perspective, possibly being possessed by her, blurring the line between victim and monster. Another major theory centers on guilt and repression. drawing comparisons from Silent Hill 2, like James Sunderland and protagonist PT may have committed a terrible act and suppressed the memory. Evidence for this includes the way Lisa only kills the player under certain conditions, the act of gouging out their eyes in the hallway in the photograph, and the implications that confronting or acknowledging certain truths allows progression. In this interpretation, the game is less about escape and more about forced confrontation with past sins. The radio broadcasts are central to the nearly every theory. Early on, the radio reports a familicide in a father which murders his wife and his children with a rifle. Details of the crime align closely with the imagery found in the house: a pregnant wife shot in the stomach, a child hiding in the bathroom, and chanting numbers before the murders. The father is found listening to the radio afterwards, suggesting the broadcast may not have been neutral background noise, but an influencing force. The unnatural tone of the broadcast, particularly the way 911 is read as loud as 911, implies something was subtly wrong, as if the signal itself distorted or not fully human. Later radio interruptions intensify this paranoia. The radio warns the player not to trust their surrounding, urges them to keep listening, and introduces the recurring number 204863. When the radio tells a player to look behind you, obeying this results in death, reinforcing the idea that the radio manipulates rather than protects. Lisa's design further connects her to the broadcast victim. She appears bloodied around the stomach and is missing an eye, mirroring both the shooting and the pregnant wife and the defaced photograph in the hallway. The Swedish radio message introduces a different layer of interpretation. Referencing a radio drama from 75 years ago, widely believed to allude to the War of the Worlds, this message suggests that the unseen entities have been monitoring humanity for decades. This has led to speculation about the extraterrestrial or interdimensional beings, influenced by events in Silent Hill, possibly using radio transmissions to manipulate vulnerable individuals. Under this theory, the fathers are not acting independently but were influenced, or even chosen by an external intelligence. Other interpretations reject the alien angle and instead frame the radio as a symbolic force, representing paranoia, radicalization, and social pressure. The broadcasts flatten the listener, validate their anger, and redirect blame towards the institution and society at large. In this reading, the radio becomes a catalyst for violence, encouraging the listener to see themselves as a victim who is justified in taking action. The final aggressive broadcast urging listeners to do it represents the breaking point, after which there is no going back. The fetus in the sink introduces another level of ambiguity. Its voice is clear and unfiltered, unlike the radio, suggesting it may be an internal monologue rather than an external transmission. The fetus recounts the pregnant's personal failures, job loss, alcoholism, and resentment of his wife. This supports the theory that the main character may be the father from the radio broadcast, reliving or reconstructing his crime within a distorted mental landscape. Whether the wife actually had an affair or whether this was a belief paranoia justification remains intentionally unclear. The final broadcast, delivered from a perspective of a murdered son, complicates the narrative further. The speaker mocks his father's dullness and the lack of originality before promising to return with new toys. This suggests the cycle of violence is an inheritance, where trauma, ideology, or even monstrosity is passed down. Some interpretations propose that this voice belongs to the unborn child, others to a different victim entirely, but they all point towards the repetition rather than resolution. Ultimately, PT resists in a single explanation. It can be read as a story about guilt, self haunting, possession, societal pressure, toxic masculinity, or manipulation through the media. By fragmenting time, perspective, and truth, this game traps the player in the same uncertainty as the protagonist. Whatever is the true interpretation, the horrors of PT lies in the possibility that the enemy was never the ghost in the hallway, but the self fractured and reflected back through the walls. Alright, we're back to my personal opinions, which like 1% of you see. So, when I played PT, I found that a lot of the tension gradually turned into frustration because of how unclear and unforgiving the design could be. The puzzles, especially the final one, were so obscure it felt less like a problem solving and more like a guessing, invisible condition that the game wanted me to meet, which often pulled me out of the experience. So all the time I was Googling what to do because there was no way I was figuring that out on my own. Walking through the same hallway again and again felt effective at first, but over time it became repetitive, especially when progress depended on tiny, unexplained changes that were easy to miss. There were multiple moments where I generally thought the game was broken because there was no feedback to indicate whether I was moving forward or doing something wrong. The story, while interesting, was delivered in such a fragmented, encrypted way that it was difficult to follow without looking up explanations, which made me feel detached rather than immersive. On top of that, knowing the entire experience was only a playable teaser for a full game that would never be released left everything feeling unfinished. The fact PT can no longer be officially downloaded makes those frustrations even harder to overlook, since new players can't experience it firsthand without workarounds. What did stand out to me was how effortlessly it created tension using almost nothing at all. The game's less is more approach is more familiar hallway feel increasingly hostile. The subtle environment changes were enough to keep me constantly on edge. The sound design played a huge role in this, with distant footsteps, radio static, and sudden silences make it feel like something was always watching, even when there was nothing there. I also loved how the story was told entirely through the environment rather than cutscenes, forcing me to piece together the disturbing narrative through visual details, broadcasts, and repeated loops. Lisa herself is one of the most effective horror antagonists I've ever encountered, especially because the game often forces you to turn around in cramped spaces, creating a sense of paranoia and vulnerability that few games manage to actually achieve. Also, 35 subscribers, that's crazy. But thank you so much for watching. I've been Critical Fate.